Today we're going to talk about the JavaScript coding standards. So WordPress has some JavaScript coding standards, and we're going to talk about them step by step. So the very first thing is that WordPress uses a single quotation mark for string declaration. Okay, so whenever you declare a string, you need to use a single quotation mark. For example, let's see. So let's say I define variable x or val. So if you write variable name is equal to it says Sam, so this should be in single quotes and not double quotes. That's what it's trying to say. Okay, case statements are intended within the switch blocks, indented within the switch blocks, and functions contents are consistently intended. Okay, all right, so we'll go into the detail of it. All right, so first is the indentation. Use spaces liberally throughout your code for improved developer readability. Okay, so don't be like Syngento, not use the code with the space. Use it whenever we want to. So when in doubt, space it out. Okay, all of this information is available on your WordPress.org core handbook best practices coding standard JavaScript. So even if you go to coding standards on the WordPress org, you can select the JavaScript coding standard and you'll be able to find this page. Okay, and all of this information that I'm telling you is been taken from there. Okay, each tab is equal to 4 spaces. I'm sure you already know that. Use tabs for indentation and not spaces. Okay, so whenever you want to go ahead and switch to the next line and you want to give some space, to use tab and not spaces. Okay, so by the way, these marks that you are seeing over here, these are actually settings that I've done via PHP Storm. Switched on the show white spaces and tabs and everything. So that is the reason you're able to see it, because WordPress has some coding standard in which you're supposed to use only one tab here and one tab from here while you are defining these next line variable. So that is the reason I'm using it, just to ensure that I don't commit any mistakes. But you don't have to necessarily do it all the time. Okay, next is no white space at the end of the line or on blank line. So in case if you have a blank line like this, so don't use spaces like this. So I've changed my setting of the PHP Storm so I can see spaces. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but you see dot dot over here. This denotes the white spaces, and this denotes one tab. One tab is equal to 4 spaces. So what this is saying is that do not use white spaces, but use tab instead, and don't use the white spaces at the end of the line, which means when the line ends like this, don't you leave an extra space, otherwise you're going to get in, that it's not following the code standards of WordPress. All right, you can turn on the show white spaces option on PHP Storm. So I've already explained to you that if you want to turn on this option and see if you have left any extra white spaces, you can do that by going to PHP Storm preferences, editor, general, appearance, and then just check this and hit OK. Okay, you'll be able to see this. All right, so that's that. Next is lines should usually be no longer than 80 characters. Okay, so if you're writing any quotes, the length of this line, including your tabs and white spaces, should not exceed more than 80 characters, and maximum it should not exceed 100 characters. Okay, including tabs and spaces. Long lines indicate unreadable and disorganized code. Okay, so if the code that you're writing is really long, then it becomes difficult for the reader to read it. He has to scroll it or write on the right hand side, which is not a really good way of writing it. Okay, all right, next. Okay, one more thing. If you want to switch on this white spaces option, you can also do that by pressing Command Shift A on Mac and then typing white, and you'll be able to see, and you can turn it on and off from here. Okay, cool. Next, if else, for, while, try, these kind of statements, blocks should always use braces and always go on multiple lines. Okay, so what this is trying to say, that if you use an if statement, okay, then in that case they should always use braces. Okay, so this way of writing, yeah, there's another way of writing it, like, colon and all that. There's other ways of writing, these kind of codes, but in as per the WordPress coding standard, you should use braces. Okay, perfect. uh, Unary special characters operators, for example plus plus or minus minus, must not have the spaces next to their operands. Um, for example, sometimes you need to write for example, there's a variable we can define a is, as you can see, already defined. So if I want to write a plus plus, so what this is saying, that there shouldn't be any spaces before the plus plus sign. You shouldn't write like this. Okay, it should be all together. Okay, and even same goes for the minus minus as well. Any comma and colon must not have a preceding space. Okay, so if you're writing this colon, there shouldn't be any space like this. It should be all together. If you are writing a comma like you've done here, there should not be a preceding space. It should be all together. Okay. Any colon used as a statement terminator must be at the end of the line. So this colon needs to be at the end of the line and not like somewhere here. So I think that's pretty basic. You understand that. Okay, any colon after property name in an object definition must not have a preceding space. So for example, in case if you're creating an object, let's say var new object is equal to, and if you're defining a property, so let's say I define a property name called prop name, and its value, prop name is, let's say, resting or something. Yep. So what this is saying is there should not be any preceding space before the colon. There shouldn't be a space like this. It should be all together. Okay. The question mark and the colon in a ternary condition must have spaces on both sides. So if you're writing a condition, if condition, question mark, and the value will be expression 1 and the value will be expression 2 in case if it's false, then you should not you should actually leave spaces on both sides of the question mark and the colon like this. So this is the correct way of writing it, not this. Okay. No filler spaces in empty construct. For example, this and this. So for example, if you define a function, there should not be an empty space. So let me write the name of the function first. Let's say foo func. So there shouldn't be any empty space inside of this, like this. Okay, there shouldn't be any empty space. And secondly, in case if you've just defined a function, you've not written anything inside of it, then also in that case also there shouldn't be any empty space inside of this. So if you're just writing the function, you're going to write something later on inside of it, there shouldn't be any empty space inside of this. And similarly, if you've not passed any variable inside the function, there should not be any empty space. It should be like this. Okay, cool. And similarly for an array declaration as well, there shouldn't be any empty space. So just if I want to show you that, so variable, say array is equal to, So there shouldn't be any empty space here. It should be together in case if you're defining an empty array. Okay, cool. Next, there should be a new line at the end of each file. So if my file is going to end here, then I should have one new line over here. Okay, then it says any not negation operator should have a following space. So if you're defining a defining a condition here, let's say inside of this function, if I want to write if not a, which means a has a value, so there should be space after this not sign. Okay, it should not be like this, but it should be like this. So there should be a space after the not sign. Okay, and all function bodies are indented by one tab even if the entire file is wrapped in an enclosure. So what this means is that even if the entire file is wrapped within this self-executable function, there should be only one tab here. We shouldn't write like this. We shouldn't write like this. Okay, so all of the definitions that we are the starting point of those definitions, there has to be only one tab here for all of them, not two tabs. All right. Now, JavaScript standards prefer broader white spaces rules for consistency between PHP and JavaScript files in WordPress code base. Okay, so we like to leave a lot of spaces for readability, for better readability. Okay. Next is objects. So objects declaration can be made on a single line if they are short. Remember the length guidelines, it has to be like 80 characters, no more than 100 characters including tabs and spaces. So if you're just declaring a variable, they can be in one line for a small object, but if they are lengthy, then they have to be in multiple line declaration. So when an object declaration is too long, that doesn't fit on one line, there must be one proper property per line, and property names only need to be quoted if they are reserved words for containing special characters. Okay, so for example here you should only put the property name in quotes if they are special characters, if they have special characters, or if they are reserved words. Okay, like in this case we had a space over here, so we put a quote. So this is our property name, or in case if there was any hyphen or something, you can put them in quotes. All right, so what this is saying is that if it's just a small object that we have created which has only got like 3 properties, or we can just define it one line, but it is still preferable that you leave lines if you're going to be defining more properties and values. This is not really a right way of doing it, because you can see it's all jumbled up. We don't know what's going on, and we have to follow one particular standard of writing the objects. All right, next is array and function calls. Always include extra spaces between elements and arguments. So it talks about that whenever you define an array, there has to be a space here and not before comma. Remember, there should not be any preceding space before comma, but after comma, yes, and there should be a space here as well. Okay, similarly, when you are defining any argument, there are parameters in a function, then before the parameter and after the parameter there should be a space. Similarly here as well, as you can see, using space here as well and here as well. Okay, so only exception to this, that in case if you are going to be using literal strings, if you are using an array and there's a string that is defined inside of the array, only in that case we don't leave the space after and before the string. Okay, so we don't leave the space. So this is right, this is correct. Similarly, if you have any single index like 0 or 1 over here in an array, then you don't leave the space. Otherwise, if this had a variable, if this had like a var inside of it, then yes, you will leave the space. But if it has a string like this, or if it has a number like this, then yes, you have to you should not leave space. Okay, Now example, this is example of good spacing. As you can see, there's a space, the condition is right here, and then there's a space here, there's space here, before else, after else, before if, after if, there's all space going on right here. So you can go through this, and as I explained to you earlier, after the not sign there should be a space, and there shouldn't be any space before the ternary operators, before the plus sign, and then there is space everywhere, as you can see. Yeah, cool. Moving on. Semicolons, you should use them wherever it's required, and don't rely on automatic semicolon insertion. Okay. Indentation and line breaks. Tabs should be used for indentation even if the entire file is contained in an enclosure. So I think I already explained that to you, that even if the entire file is contained in an enclosure like this, which is a self-executing function, you should use tab. So if I had to write this, moment. So my system is not allowing me to automatically do it. Just one moment. Yeah. So for example, if you want to write something else over here, let's say if you want to write another function, so you know that space, 4 space is equal to 1 tab. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it doesn't mean that you will go ahead and start the function using a space. Don't use space, use tab. That's what it's trying to say. Okay, so instead of using space, use tab whenever you're writing something new. Okay, so space is not really a good idea to use. So tab should be used for indentation even if the entire file is contained in enclosure. Immediately the contents of that function should be indented by 1 tab. Alright, great. Blocks and curly braces. If, alright, so if, else, for, while, and try blocks should always use braces and always go on multiple lines. Okay, the opening brace should be on the same line as the function definition, condition, or the loop, and the closing brace should be on the line directly following the last statement of the block. So what it's trying to say that if statement, else statement, for, while, and try, all of these ones should have this braces. Okay, so don't use any shorthand method, use the braces. Okay, and the end, the last brace, the closing brace should be right before the statement's end. Sorry, right after the statement ends. Okay, the last statement ends. Now multi-line statements, when a statement is too long to be fit on one line, then the line break must occur after an operator. So in case if you have a really long set of codes that you've written, and if you want to, you should write the some part of it on the next line, but ensure that whenever you're changing the line, the point at which the line is changed should be an operator and not a variable or a string. Okay, like this. So this is an incorrect way of doing it, is because we are changing the line on an variable rather than on an operator. So this is the correct way of doing it. Just for your information, an LT is basically the character entity, less than character entity reference for less than character sign in HTML, and GT is the greatest than character entity for greater than character in HTML. So this part right over here is just going to output our p tag. Okay, great. Lines should be broken into logical groups if it improves readability, such as splitting each expressions of a ternary operator on its own line, even if both will fit onto a single line. Okay, so what this is saying is that in case if this is long, so in case if you're writing a condition and it is quite long, then break it by line. All right. When a condition is too long to fit, just one second. Yeah, so after question mark, if you see the thing one, we are actually breaking the line and writing it. So there's a different code altogether, but that's okay. After question mark, we're just breaking in. That's all we want to say. After colon, we break the line because it's long. Similarly, if you have something inside of the conditional statement which is quite long, we break it, but the part of it where we are breaking it should be at least one tab indented so that it creates a difference between the conditional statement and the body of the condition. So it should be distinguished from the body. Chain method of calls. When a chain method of call is too long to fit into one line, there must be one call per line. Okay, and the first call should be on a separate line from the object the methods are called on. If the method changes the context, an extra level of indentation must be used. So in case if you have multiple calls, then each call should be on one single line, and if there's a context that's changing, for example in this case here, then you can use one tab for differentiating it from the rest of it as for the indentation. Declaring variables with var. So variable assignment using var should be listed on individual line like so. Variable declaration can be grouped on a single line like so. So in case if you have just declaration, what this is saying is that if you have just declaration, it doesn't have a value that you are declaring, then put that in one line. And in case if you have some values, separate them by lines. So in this case I have k, m and length don't have any values, hence I put them on one line. And then I have c and a variables which have got values, hence I've put them on different lines. Okay, so this is incorrect because for all sort of variables we can just define var once. You don't have to keep on defining var each time for each variable. Alright, next is globals. So all globals used within a file should be documented at the top of the file. So if you're going to use any globals, then at the top of the file just write a comment like this: global password strength. So if password strength was the name of the global variable, and you put true. So I'll explain to you what this means. Password strength will be an allowed global variable within that file once you declare it. The true after password strength means that this global is being defined within this file. If you're assigning a global which is defined elsewhere, then you just change true to read only. Okay, and if you're defining multiple globals, then just separate them with a comma. So password strength colon true comma next one and so on. Common libraries. So different JavaScript libraries like backbone, jQuery, underscore, and the global WP object are all registered as allowed globals. So basically there are libraries like jQuery, underscore, backbone and things like that, but they also have a global allowed globals, and the name of the globals are backbone. There's a global called jQuery for jQuery, underscore for underscore library, and WP for WordPress. So these are all globals, okay, and they're all registered in the root file which is called .js hint rc. Backbone and underscore may be accessed directly at any time. However, jQuery should be accessed by $sign by passing jQuery in object into anonymous function like so. So we use a self-executing function. We pass $sign and then we pass jQuery as a global. Once we do that, then jQuery $sign will be available to all of the functions and variable inside of this self-executing function. That's exactly what we've done here as well. Okay, so we have passed $sign and we have passed the global of jQuery, which is called jQuery, and now we have this available in the entire set of codes that we want to write inside of this function. Now how this will help us? This will negate the need to call no conflict function method, or to set using another variable. So there is a function called no conflict. You can do like $no conflict function is equal to whatever name you give over here is going to change $sign to this. So now instead of passing $sign, you can pass JQ and it will do the same thing. that will replace the $sign with JQ. Okay, that's why this function is used, to replace $sign with something of your own choice. If you're going to use global WP object in your file, then to avoid overwriting previously set properties, define this at the top of the file. Okay. Naming conventions. So you go ahead and use, camel casing. So separate words by using camel casing. I'm sure you already know that, how to do it. Unlike your PHP. Unless you're using a new word, so when you're creating an object using new word, then in that case the first letter needs to be capital. Otherwise, in all scenarios, the first letter will be small, and each time it's a different word, the first letter of the next word will start with S and following with G and so on. But in case if you're defining a if you're creating an object with new, then the name of that should start with capital. Okay, and follow that same rule going forward. Then comments. Comment should always be preceded by a blank line. Okay, so if you are going to write a comment like here, there should be a blank line before that. There must be a single space between the comment token and the comment text. So there should be a single space between this token and the text that you're writing. So single line comment looks like this. Multiple line comments should be used for long comments like this. Inline comments are allowed as an exception when used to annotate the special arguments in argument list. So as you can see here, this was an argument, and we wanted to tell what argument it is. So we can do an inline comments going ahead and defining like this. Okay. Equality. So strict equality checks are used using triple equal to, must be used in favor of abstract with non-realistic equality checks. So don't use double equal to when checking conditions. Use triple equal to, unless if you are checking both undefined and null by the way of null, like so. So if you're going to use this method, then use double equal to. Otherwise, in all scenarios, use triple equal to during your condition checks. So these are some of the type checks of a string. This is how it is checked: type of object, string, type of object, number. You can pause the video and you can go through them if you want. It's pretty simple. So just for information, anywhere backbone or underscore are used, you are encouraged to use underscore.js type checking methods over jQuery. So whenever backbone or underscore are used, use the underscore.js methods and functions instead of using jQuery functions. Strings. Use single quotes for string literals, as I've already explained at the beginning of the tutorial. When a string contains single quotes, they need to be escaped by a backslash. Switch statement. Highly discouraged, but in case if you have to, for example, when there are a large number of cases, especially when there are multiple cases that can be handled by the same block, or fall through logic, then this switch statement can be used. Okay, so use a break statement for each case, and also indent case statement with one tab. Okay, it is not recommended to return a value from a switch statement. Use case blocks to set this value. So for example, don't do a return value after each case. Just declare a variable like result. In each case it will have a different value, and at the end just return that value. So in case if this condition passes, result value will be commit, and it's not going to go through all of it. It's going to break over here and it'll come straight over here and we'll have the value as commit. So don't return it on each cases, just return it once by declaring that as a variable on top. So best practices for arrays: you define the array by two square brackets like this instead of using like new array. That is not really a preferred method. This is the right way of, preferred method as per the coding standards to define an array, empty array. You can also initialize array with its values like so, with spacing of course. Objects, you can define objects like this, a simple way of doing that. In case if you want defining object using new method, then the first letter, as I explained earlier, should be capital. Object properties are accessed by dot notation, we all know, but in case if variable is a reserved word, for example variable key, if it was a reserved word, then we are going to use the square brackets. Or in case if uh, is not a valid identifier, it has got hyphens or spaces and things like that, then we use them in quotes and then we wrap them within the square bracket instead of using dot notation to access those properties. Yoda style of writing, which means that the value of the condition that we are checking, the variable that we are checking should be put on the right hand side, and the value against which we are checking should be on the left hand side. Iteration: when iterating over the large collection of for loop, it is recommended to store the loop's maximum value as a variable rather than recomputing it maximum every time. So for example, if we had to this function which gives us the value of max, then instead of defining this function every time, and which means each time the loop is run this function is going to be called, we'll just declare that in a variable and then call so that it gets called once. Okay, so here it's going to get called once, but this is not the right way of doing it, is because this function is getting called every time. So we'll cache that value in a variable because we're going to need it each time the loop runs. Next is underscore.js collection functions. So you can study underscore if you already know, brilliant. It's just saying that you use underscore.js collection functions over jQuery unless it's really required. So for things like Ajax and all, use jQuery, but for most cases go ahead and use underscore.js collection of functions as compared to jQuery. Okay, you can go on this, you can go onto the underscore JS page and study about it. Iteration over jQuery collections. The only time jQuery should be used for iteration is when iterating over collection of jQuery objects. Never use jQuery to iterate over raw data or vanilla JavaScript object like so. Last but not the least, JS Hint. So JS Hint, as you know, is a quality code tool, and it is used in WordPress development to quickly verify that a patch has not introduced any logic or syntax errors to the front end. So in case if you're not getting any syntax error, it doesn't mean that your code is as per the coding standard. There could be some errors. We can find that with the help of JS Hint tool. So you can install it, you can search on Google JS Hint and you'll be able to know how to install this. Okay, in some situations parts of the file should be excluded from JS Hint. For example, the script file for an admin bar contains minified code for jQuery hover intent plugin. This is a third-party code that should not pass through JS Hint, even though it is a part of WordPress core JavaScript file. So to exclude a specific file region from being processed, enclose it in JS Hint directive comments. Alright, so that's about it. So I think pretty much everything is clear. If you have any questions, please leave the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.